Everybody in attendance tonight, get a bottle in your hands and pull up. And if you are...
Hello and welcome to Inconsequential Souls. Today, I want to do, I want to have a discussion about the future DLC of the Dark Souls 3 franchise, and my opinions on it, and I guess what it is that I'd like to see in the future. Now, before I get to the main topic of this discussion, which would be the Majestic, the Southern Majestic Ring, quote unquote, I need to address a few things. Okay, so first of all, I don't have many ideas for Dark Souls 3, admittedly, of what it needs. I really feel like it's a complete game. It did pretty well with the weapons. Of course, there could be some balancing as far as weapons are concerned and things like that. But for the most part, with the tweaks that have taken place all the way up to Regulation 1.09, I'm pretty satisfied with the direction that the game's going at this point. So I can see the DLC adding maybe a few novelty items, but I feel as though Dark Souls 3 is a pretty solid game right now. And I'm not really sure what they do. However, I know there's probably been tons of discussion as far as like the storyline, uncovering more secrets of the story, things that basically have to do with lore and I guess the stories behind certain characters and stuff like that. And I'm sure many other YouTubers have talked about it to death, or many other people who make Dark Souls video content. So there's no need for me to even discuss that, because I mean, really, like I'm not really. Oh boy, that was messed. But yeah, I'm not really interested in that. My interest lies in game mechanics, and because I was able to complete Dark Souls 3, and form my own personal opinion about the game from start to finish, I can discuss some of the things I'd like to see in the future of the series that have to do with mechanics. Now, this is a little strange because I haven't really fooled around with spells or any of the other weapon types, but I have done a lot of PvP, so I've seen quite a bit of what's possible with some of the spells and weapons. But until I really dig into it, I would rather have somebody more qualified discuss what spells, or I would say weapons, probably need to make an appearance in the game. Because again, from my perspective, I feel as though Dark Souls 3 is a rather complete game. And I'm sure that my opinion probably isn't the popular one. So that's up to someone else to discuss. But one point I want to make is that as far as stealth arts is concerned, I have yet to explore all of them. I've had experience with the Slumbering Dragon Crest ring. I've seen what the Untrue ring can do. And because of Dark Souls 2 being the game where I feel as though it kind of revolutionized variety in builds and things like that as far as player versus player interactions are concerned, I pretty much know what's possible with things like the Untrue ring, the White ring, Obscuring ring, Hidden Body, Chameleon, certain gestures being used because the level designs are a little bit more elaborate. All of those things are obvious to me. And these are things that I wanted in Dark Souls 2, but they're available in Dark Souls 3, and I have yet to really stretch my legs with those things. But I've seen other players use it, and I know it works. So stealth is pretty much covered. And I feel as though, even though I made, I would say, the essential assassin build, where I could practically tell a person step by step how to build the perfect assassin, I'm soon going to be doing a thief playthrough and developing the gameplay for the thief class. So that'll be something to look forward to. So stealth is pretty much covered, and that's something that I usually discuss in my videos. But this topic is going to be a little bit different, and I have had experience with using I would say the mechanic that I'm going to discuss in this video from this point on. And then I'll get into, I guess, other smaller details about things that might not necessarily have to do with the main topic of this video. But if we have extra time, there will be some close relation to it, and I think it'll be important for the for an overall understanding of my point of view. But for now, let's start discussing what it is that I mean by mechanics. Okay, so Dark Souls 2 is an interesting beast. Now, the vanilla game, in my opinion, was pretty good, but it needed a lot of work, and it didn't feel like a complete game. Now, I can't speak for the PvE portion, or what most people would call the adventure mode, because I didn't really enjoy that portion of the game. I was more interested in the PvP. But PvP felt rather incomplete until the DLCs made their appearance. And one of the main, I would say, probably one of the things that had the biggest impact was the updates to the pyromancy spells. Namely Fire Snake and I would say Dancing Flame in particular. And I'll get into detail about why that is shortly. But what I will say is I really think that the power stance function added a whole new depth to Dark Souls 2's PvP that wasn't really a thing in any other Dark Souls game up until that point. And that's important because we still have, I would say, a comparison or something similar to power stance in Dark Souls 3. But here's why it's not the same thing. Okay, so for example, when I first began my dagger arts in Dark Souls 2, I began using a weapon called the Bone Fist. Now, the Bone Fist was important because it allowed, I would say, a mix-up game for any player who decided to have either a small shield in the left hand or just basically decided to go barehanded. Now, what was important about this mix-up game, I would say, is that it allowed gameplay to be that tad bit different in each experience that you had when you were going up against an opponent, where they always had this quote-unquote ace up their sleeve. Now, what was essential about the Bone Fist was that it had several different weapon movesets, if that makes any sense. It had a moveset that was in relation to your left hand. It had a moveset relation to using the hand. I mean using the Bone Fist two-handed, if that makes any sense. I know it's strange because Dark Souls 3 kind of made things like that make a little bit more sense, where if you, I would say, quote-unquote, power stance the fist, you just hold a cestus in both hands. Whereas in Dark Souls 2, your character would kind of clutch their fist in their other hand, and it kind of looked as if they were doing an axe handle smash gesture. You know how you would do if you were holding a flagpole with two hands? They would do that with their bare fists. Now, I know it's strange. The attack for it was strange. It was just a really strange way to handle that. However, the Bone Fist specifically had a lot of interesting attacks when you did that, and it gave you just enough variety to make PvP a little bit more interesting, whereas the weapon was nearly invisible. And what I mean by that is it sort of works in the similar manner as I've seen people do with the claw weapons, where they'll have a set of claw weapons so then they can power stance it, and then they'll have a set of claw weapons that act as two separate weapons on their own, to where it gives them an entirely different moveset. So for example, they can parry with the left hand rather than it being your special power stance attack. So that was already a thing in Dark Souls 2. It just went a little further, and I would say another weapon that really I don't know, that really took advantage of this would be something like the Majestic Greatsword. Now this was a parallel to the Wolf, I think it's called the Wolf Knight Greatsword in Dark Souls 3, also known as the Abyss Greatsword, or the true Greatsword of Artorias. It's had a couple of different a couple of different names for each game, but they're basically the same weapon. Now, just a quick history lesson on that weapon. In Dark Souls 1, I believe there were 3 different versions of that weapon. To make it a little, to make a long story short, each of those different versions of Dark Souls 1 had a different special attack. The idea of being able to do the 360 degree spin and the 360 degree flip into chop attack that looks something like a Braver from Final Fantasy. I guess that's the best way I can describe it. It's sort of like a somersault sword attack. That used to be exclusive to each version of the weapon. Dark Souls 2 kind of consolidated those abilities, whereas depending on how the player was wielding the Majestic Greatsword, also known as the Artorias Greatsword or the Wolf's Knight Greatsword, they were able to execute both of those moves because in spirit they were practically the same weapon. Whereas in Dark Souls 1, if a person wanted to have a mix-up game, they were required to wield each type of sword, which it was completely doable, but it was just a little unreasonable. And because most players, the soul level required to do that effectively was beyond what most players would raise their soul level up to, it would have been very difficult to use that kind of build, quote unquote, anywhere but against enemies within the game, where at that point like a mix-up game isn't really all that useful to you. So aside from that, the Majestic Greatsword revolutionized the idea of a southpaw, whereas the player was able to execute moves in an unorthodox way, whereas rather than attacking from the right hand, they would attack from the left hand. And most times, players would use the shield in the right hand. That was very important for Dark Souls 2's PvP, because that was just sort of like the tip of the iceberg. Whereas, as I mentioned before, we had the whole thing going on with the Bone Fist, where you could swap the Bone Fist for a small shield, and etc., where it was very similar to how the claw weapons work in Dark Souls 3. So, in a sense, Dark Souls 2 pretty much... Oh, wow. Look at what he did. But yeah, Dark Souls 2 pretty much allows Dark Souls 3 to be what it is. And the point of me bringing that up is that a mix-up game really allows for PvP variety. And what I think the true complaint for most players who aren't really satisfied with Dark Souls 3's PvP is when they mean lack of variety. I think what they mean to say is they've been spoiled by the freedom of being able to have unpredictable or ever-changing characters, even in the slightest manner, in Dark Souls 2, whereas Dark Souls 3 is a little bit more straightforward, where a weapon is what it is, and developing a meta for a weapon that is what it is. There is room for variety, I believe, in Dark Souls 3, but it's pretty much straightforward. Now, I believe that was the case in Dark Souls 1, and again, with the backstab exploits and things of that nature, I'm sure most people by now already understand my opinion that the type of fighting for Dark Souls 1 didn't really have room to improve because there were a lot of broken mechanics that overshadowed the potential of the game. But, for example, I would say in Dark Souls 2, when the spell, which was called Fire Snake, was introduced to PvP, it allowed other moves, or I would say other spells, such as the Firestorm spells that players had adapted to become a little bit more effective, because now the threat of having to guess which spell a player is going to use, because avoiding them requires you to do different things, it allowed spells that pretty much had a standard counter to them to become a little bit harder to predict, which allowed the storm spells to become useful again. And I think that's the same thing people are looking for in Dark Souls 3 PvP. So, it needs to be, you have to understand, dual wielding in Dark Souls 2 was a pretty big deal. There was this huge campaign for it. There was even a class dedicated to it. As far as the, I'm not sure if it was a network test. Yes, it was a network stress test, I believe. And people were really excited for it. And the thing is, it really lived up to its hype. Whether people admit it or not, it really lived up to our expectations. And people got really creative with the types of builds that they made. And I can tell you, like, 1,000+ hours in the Brotherhood of Blood arena pretty much qualifies me to make that statement. So the concept of this Southern Majestic ring, basically based on the concept of the Majestic Ray Sword, is that I think a ring should exist in Dark Souls 3 that practically allows the player to use left-hand weapons and have them function as if they were in the right hand. Now, of course, you would be sacrificing your ability to power stance, which I think would be just fine, because in my opinion at this point, because of the way that the power stance works in Dark Souls 3, a player would obviously have to sacrifice something like the Grasscrest shield. Whereas when you dual wield with the Grasscrest shield, you still get the buff for it because it counts as it being equipped. However, the drawback would be when you use the ring that allows you to use a left-hand weapon as if it was in your right hand. You would sacrifice that ability. You would have two weapons, but you would sacrifice the ability to use like a synergy combination like the Clearanthi ring. The benefit to that, however, would be for the player to use the power attacks for both weapon types and be able to alternate back and forth. Use the roll attacks, the backstep attacks, all of the different variety of attacks simultaneously with the other weapon in their hand. And I really think that would bring, it would take PvP up a notch, in my opinion. And the reason that I think that should be a thing is because I believe you can already do that with magic. So it's not really all that strange. Also, considering the fact that there's some weapons that I really think have strong weaknesses to them when you're not allowed to have a mix-up game. Again, I don't have experience with a bunch of the weapons. I'm only speaking from a perspective of going up against different player types. I really think some weapons don't really need the type of help, quote unquote, of trying to make them better. I think they just need to be allowed to, I would say, work well with other weapons without having to, for example, switch out to something else, or a variety of other things. I would say basically switching out, like, and again, the weakness would obviously be that you can't use synergy abilities, and then of course your weapon arts would go missing. So that kind of build, I think, would be more suited to someone who doesn't plan to use weapon arts, or probably even a whole lot of shields to parry. But at the same token, I believe that maybe the ring should have an effect on the right hand in some way too, whereas players can also parry with the right hand and then use the weapon in the left hand. I mean, I feel as though at this point it's really easy for From Software to get creative with the new items, but the idea of it taking up more than one ring slot to do something like that, I think might be going a little too far. But I do definitely think that the ability to use a weapon in the left hand as if it was your right hand would really take things up a notch. My only concern would be, how would that work for a person who might want to parry, with their right hand weapon. Now, again, there could probably be a special shield or item that does that. So, I mean, it's not really a big deal. I believe that maybe the parry dagger might work that way, but I can't be sure. But, yeah, I think that would be an interesting concept. And that's why I pretty much focused on the idea of a Southern Majestic ring. So, basically just the idea of drawing from concepts of from Dark Souls 2 that already exist. So it's not really something that I have to come up with. I would say out of the blue. It already exists in the franchise. But I think as far as the ability to use the left hand as if it's the right hand, a ring slot isn't really that bad. I mean, I kind of feel in Dark Souls 3 that a lot of the ring items are really useful enough to where 9 times out of 10 the fourth ring slot that you're using is something that can be switched in and out with something else. I mean, I've pretty much had that I've had that experience myself. I've never felt as though any build that I used was ineffective if they didn't have a third very specific ring. The third ring, as long as I've been playing, always seems to be the one that you can say, oh, well, this would be useful, but it's not necessary for this build to work. So I think something like that would probably be it would be a godsend for Dark Souls 3's PvP. Now, again, in my personal opinion, I think that Dark Souls 3 feels like a pretty complete game at this point, and adding something like that would just be icing on the cake. So as far as like the DLC is concerned, with storylines and introducing new characters, I mean, I always think more is fine. I mean, I guess it would probably leave room for more unique items, because I don't really think the game needs more swords. We have enough short swords. I think we have enough daggers. I think I don't know. Like, I'm being very honest. I can't really think of much else that Dark Souls, 3 really needs. But who knows? Like, From Software might be cooking up something pretty interesting that we might not see coming. But until I have experience with, I guess, other types of builds personally, I don't really think. I think the things that we have now could probably just use for improvement. Now, that isn't to say that I wouldn't enjoy more Dark Souls 3. I think that would be great, for the game, even though it feels really huge and really complete. More of what you love is, I guess, never really a bad thing. Who knows? But anyway, my point is, I do look forward to the DLC, and now that I've completed the game, I felt as though I was qualified to speak about mechanics. Now, talking about mechanics at this point, now that I discussed what the concept of this the Southern Majestic Ring is, I think I want to kind of speak freely at this point. So, oh wow. So now that I've been doing quite a bit of PvP, and I'm going to start working on some beef art videos in the future, I just wanted to talk a little bit about Dark Souls 2's PvP and what it's done for the Souls series. Now, I've said this before, and I don't think I've had a chance to bring it up in a video on my channel. I've pretty much talked about this subject in forums and discussions with, I would say, other Dark Souls YouTubers before I actually had my channel. So I don't think that they're lost in the pages of history. Like, if somebody wants to dig them up, if you're interested in hearing about it, you can. They're out there in these discussions that I've had. But one of the things I've been trying to make a point of is that I think the Souls community really underestimated the power of Dark Souls 2. I think I've addressed maybe in some videos, but I'm just going to pretend as if I had. I'm going to pretend as if I had, and I'm going to pretend as if this is the only video that you've seen that I've made as far as addressing Dark Souls 2's PvP. Now, Dark Souls 2's PvP, yes, it could have used for a lot of improvements, but it was by far, some of the best and most creative player versus player interactions that I've ever seen for any game. Now, Dark Souls 3 is superior in a lot of ways, but there are some things that it just doesn't do better than Dark Souls 2. Now, I'm not going to discuss what those things are, because for me, they're kind of just taste. They're more, I would say they attribute more to taste, and they don't have any place here for now. There will probably be a time and place where I can discuss that. But what I do want to talk about is the fact that the weapon art system in Dark Souls 3 and the systems in games like Bloodborne and all that, I don't think those things would even exist without Dark Souls 2. Because Dark Souls 2 was pretty much the stepping stone for all of these new ideas and concepts. Like, if you really think about it, with the two of the main focused weapons that I brought up during this video, one being the Bone Fist, the other being the Majestic Greatsword. If you really think about it, weapon arts kind of existed in Dark Souls 2 before Dark Souls 3, even came into existence. I mean, obviously because it was a second game, but Dark Souls 2 had weapon arts. Very specific weapons had those arts, but they did have weapon arts. Yeah, Dark Souls 3 did. And even if we want to take it a step further, a lot of the combinations that you see especially with I would say some of the more popular weapons like I'm gonna call it the Onikage and Ichigawa. I don't know the name of that weapon. I'm just, you know what I'm talking about, the twin katana weapons. A lot of those combinations that you see now that are pretty much just weapon arts, where the character just executes those moves just to push up a button. Those were things that people were already doing in Dark Souls 2. It just took a little bit more skill, timing, and effort. But a lot of things were doable. And I'm not sure if From Software kind of drew their inspiration for weapon arts off of that concept. But whether they did or not, it's really, it would be dishonest to say that a lot of the things that you see in Dark Souls 3 Dark Souls 2 didn't have an influence. Like, I am pretty certain that where we are now with Dark Souls 3 didn't just happen with Dark Souls 1. I'm pretty sure that Dark Souls 1, didn't just, make this huge leap from the PvP that it had in that game all the way to what it is that we see now in Dark Souls 3. Like, I really don't believe that. And considering, well, if I would go a little bit deeper into what it is that I mean. So, I have a video. It's called Standing Dagger Arts. You should really check that out when you get a chance. And I'll forewarn you, it's when my channel first started out, so I was using a camcorder to record gameplay, so the video quality is a little, it's a little bad, but it's a really good video. It expresses pretty much exactly what it is I'm talking about. Whereas the things that a dagger was able to do in Dark Souls 2, you can't really do that in Dark Souls 3 at the moment. Not as far as like I've seen. Like, combinations in Dark Souls 3 are really limited to weapon arts at this point. And I think that's fine. It's a different type of PvP, and that's totally fine. My only point is that Standing Dagger Arts video will give you a clear concept of what it is that I mean, where I say that I feel as though there were some things that Dark Souls 2 did very well, and Dark Souls 3 does, just as well, just in its own separate way. And it's very straightforward, and it's very deliberate. And I do like that daggers are what they are, great swords are what they are, rapiers are what they are, and it's up to you as the player to master those weapons. But the bridge for creativity, because of the whole dual wielding mechanic being I would say limited to what it is, it really did take away from a lot of the creativity that you were able to pull off in Dark Souls 2. Now, we may see that again. This is what this video is about. Is one of the things I would like to see is possibly a ring item. The concept being the Southern Majestic Ring that allows a weapon like the Majestic Greatsword to exist. Because I'm even thinking at this point it wouldn't be too strange for a weapon such as the Majestic Greatsword, which is known as the Wolfblood's Greatsword, to have an additional effect when wielded in the left hand. It allows the player to do some really fancy stuff, as it did in Dark Souls 2. Now, maybe I'm thinking, because this ring item would be really interesting, that it could be a synergy thing where you get to unlock a secret potential with the Wolf's Greatsword whilst wearing this ring. Who knows? I mean, sky's the limit. The DLC is probably going to be maybe not super huge, because I think Dark Souls 3 is a pretty big game already. But, maybe several bosses, if not 2 new areas, maybe 3. There's a lot of room for improvements and other ideas. I have no idea what they're gonna do, and honestly, I'm excited to see. But that's all for me. I would really like to see some of the creativity for Dark Souls 2 make a return. But anyhow, this has been Inconsequential Souls. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time.